to get you all to change the FMBug website, given that one of our guests this evening is called apparently Wim Decorate.
I didn't even.
Well, it's going to be a new event you're going to be doing, Wim. You're going to get a paintbrush out.
There you go.
Amazing. It's going to be so good.
Now this wall is green. By the end of the session, it'll be something else.
Hello, Penny. How are you?
Hello, Penny.
Hello, everyone.
Right, Jules having technical problems, so I may just start and kick off with the news, and he will join as we go. So I'm going to kick off and say thank you, everyone, for joining. I think
Gary, just here.
Oh, you're here. Go on, then. Well done.
No,
well, I was literally just going to kick off, but you can do it, Joel, and that's fine.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the goodness knows what meeting, the 79th FMBug meeting. Apologies for my delay. I was inevitably delayed. We've got a really exciting evening ahead. Lots of AI stuff. We've got Wim Decorte, we've got Chris Ippolite, and we've got Ian Jempson, all talking about AI. Wim's going to kick us off with a presentation, and then we're going to have a quick look at some of Ian's stuff. And finally, we'll be looking at having a bit of discussion with Chris as well. So it should be really good. Bring your questions along. Good to see you, Gary. We're going to start with Gary's going to present the news, and off we go.
Yes, I will do the news. Let me present my screen. Right, I'm going to kick off with the news. And yeah, there's a bit of news that's to be had. The first one is there's a bit of a news flash, and there's a couple of people in here that may know this, and a couple of them will not. And the most important one is I have left Titan and Forbidden Planet. So this will be news for everybody. After 30 plus years working for a fabulous company, I've decided to hang up my mouse and move on to other ventures, of which there isn't any at the moment. But it was mainly for family reasons, which is the sad moment of it. Various illnesses in the family, so I've had to step up and look after parents and so forth. So it's a bit of a change in career. Will it mean I'm hanging up my boots of my mouse when it comes to FileMaker, Click, and other things? Of course not. That won't happen. Hence the reason why I'm here tonight. I still want to be part of the team, the group. That's once you're a FileMaker developer, you're never not a FileMaker developer. You're always a FileMaker developer in my book. And I'm always using these events to keep up to date with what's going on. I'm still talking quite regularly to Penny and Ben at Titan. But yeah, it's a major change to me. And as you can see from the images there, I've been fortunate and blessed to work for such a great company with a great team and with various colleagues like yourselves, various conventions and God knows what. So who knows where I'll end up and what goes forward, but I'm sure I'll be in touch with everybody and keeping in touch with FileMaker and other ventures. So that was the announcement I wanted to make. You can talk to me after the event in the virtual bar afterwards and have a chat. But at the moment, we've got the whiz through the news and have the great presentations we've got for this event. So moving on, Penny has done the news as always, and she's been great and sent me a load of stuff. There's a hell of a lot of stuff out there on 2024, and I just wanted to briefly go over this. Penny actually gave me so much news. I'm not going to cover all of it. I'm going to bank some of it for next event because there was so much news she sent. A little thing I noticed on the various posts. So what's new? The what's new page for the latest version. I scrolled right down to the bottom of that, and there was a really good article, which is the 300 plus improvements. That little snippet on the left-hand side of your screen, I thought was really good because it told you the key areas where FileMaker and their talent of their developers are really pushing the boundaries and moving things forward, which is great. So like layout calculations, other bits and pieces. So that's really cool. Obviously, the release notes I looked at and I went over those. And there's the normal things that we've got is the SSL certificate stuff, which is basically improving. We've got some various options. One of the things I wanted to highlight is the macOS Sequoia support, which is great. It supports the latest version. But if you carry on reading, there's a little note down there saying Monterey is not supported anymore. So if you are pushing out the latest version, bear in mind that you've got to make sure your clients are up to a certain standard to take that version. So there's more on the technical specs that you all know the page and so forth. It's worth reading purely for that reason of they are culling the older versions of the OS to allow the installer. So, and it just won't install. So if you are running the older versions, just bear that in mind. Go over the specs before you push any updates to any of your clients that are out there. So, Soliant did a really good summary. There's various articles here that I'm showcasing. They did a great piece of all the pros and cons, all the changes, all the developments in the latest release. It was by Wim, who's here tonight, and he can comment on that further if he wishes. But it's definitely an article worth reading. It gave a really good summary. As I said, I'm not developing on a day-to-day basis anymore, but me reading that gave me a really good overview of what is in that release, what is in that platform, and what the developments are. I want to highlight a couple of other feeds that are in there as well. DB Services did a really good overview of what's in for Pro and on server. There's 2 posts there on the links. Don't worry about the links. In the notes later, I'll be posting the links, and also I'll be sharing all the links that I've got on the slides with you. But again, 2 really good articles there covering all the key changes and all the key benefits of what the latest release is. Profgeist did another good one as well. And there was a recording there as well that they then had a live event talking about the features, which I thought was really good and worth watching. On another one, which I had a debate with Doug various sessions ago about the open quickly option within FileMaker, that I didn't particularly like it from a point of view of pressing Command K, which I thought was connect to server on a Mac, not go and highlight and search your database for everything and anything. But reading the article, I do retract my statement in some of it. They've improved it, they've tweaked it, they've made it better. They've also changed in this article. You can get down to the privilege sets, which was one of my concerns, is that everyone can do it. You can now set it to basically admin rights only has rights to them certain functionalities within this platform of that function. So they are improving it, and I'm pleased to say that Claris seem to be listening to the community of the pros and cons and the issues that are around this issue of using Command K and inserting your whole database for stuff and having a user doing that. So they are developing it, and I think it is a very useful tool. It's a quick way of interrogating your schema in effect, so it's worth having. So, but again, the article goes into much more detail about what they're doing, the privilege sets around it. Working with layout calculations, this was a big article on the Claris support page, which talks about the previous ways we used to do dynamic layout objects. And I think Claris is now starting to then move into the areas of actually creating really good blog posts or articles about stuff, because they're going through and doing their own research, their own limitations, and they're giving that feedback. So it's not the matter of just us lot in the community doing this work, we always have. But they are then looking at it and going, right, here is the common pitfall if you go and do this calculation or this process as a layout object the old way and then the new way, and they're showing the benefits of the performance by using the new functions. So it's a good article. Again, that I've just highlighted the top bit of it, and they're just saying, right, if the limitations are using calculation fields required for creating additional schema, it tells you what's on there, and the load that's on the solutions that you have. And it depends on the size of your solutions, how much this is going to have an impact. But they do highlight that the more modern way of doing layout calculations is much less load on the servers, much less load on your clients, and basically your solutions. So again, really good article. HTTP tunneling. I was privileged enough to talk to John when he was testing this stuff and doing some work on it. And I know he actually ran a full test on his solution to try and get connections to his servers that he was administrating via HTTPS. Again, it just explains the methodology of it. There's the use of using 443 over 5003, which is going to make life so much easier when it comes to the effects of accessing servers and accessing various solutions you have out there that are hosted, due to the fact that 99% of firewalls are going to have 443 open. So from that point of view, you've got a route to your servers without having any firewall or config changes or puncturing holes in firewalls, which we have always done. When I was at Titan and FP, we did the same thing. We had separate rules for 5003, and we created these rules. We have firewall rules all over the place to allow FileMaker traffic through. That you won't need that as much. Now you should be able to get away with 443. The article goes into full details about what it is, how it works, how you can use it. And if you have that pointing out to the internet, you've got an option there to then actually administer your servers from remote as well, potentially. And that is a brief bit of the news. I know it's a whistle stop and very quick. And the only reason I kept it that way is we've got a fun-packed evening and a full schedule. So I want to go with the presentations and not me waffling about the news. So catch up with me in the virtual bar. I'll be around for the whole session. That's fine. And I'm sure there's going to be many questions backwards and forwards on that. And that is the news. So I'm going to stop there. So back over to you, Jill.
Great. Thanks, Gary. Excellent news, as always, brilliantly surmised and with interesting comments. As you say, we've got lots to do. Thank you to Ian for jumping in at the last minute to add to this discussion on AI, because I should have included you really from the first get-go, as you're a top dog in this field, so to speak. Chris will be joining us, not straight away, because he's got a meeting first, but he will be coming along in a bit.
Cool.
And he's seen Wim's presentation already and told me it was blindingly good, Wim. So we're expecting everything.
All right,
I'm going to be really impressed with seeing you paint those walls behind, so that's fine.
All right. Well, thanks for having me first and foremost.
Always a pleasure.
What I'll be talking about today, and like the other ones, we're talking about AI. But to frame this a little bit, I will not be talking about use cases for using AI. I'll leave that up to Ian and to Chris. I want to talk specifically about the mechanics of it, and we'll start with the features that are in FileMaker, and the features that Claris gives us to do these things locally, because I believe that once you see how it all works, you'll be able to make better decisions around how to implement that specifically. And I'm a big proponent. That's sort of why I'm presenting this here. And when I did a webinar with Claris, I think the default state should be, at least in my book, that if I need to do anything that interacts with a large language model, I will want to do that locally, meaning that I want to make it so that it's as secure as possible, that my data never has to leave my premises. And also from a cost control point of view, if I deploy this locally, I do not incur a subscription cost or a per call cost or anything like that. I have a lot more predictability, if you will, into how much this is going to cost me if I run this locally. Although cost is really important, and I'll give you an example, for me, it's really about the security, right? So I'll show you how it works, and then you can let that sink in a little bit and let it empower you to make these kinds of decisions. All right. Let me share my screen and we'll start here. The presentation that Chris was mentioning was this one, right? This is one of the Claris Community Live events. This one was a couple of weeks before the break. And I was talking specifically about using local LLMs, large language models, doing it locally, right? So deploy them yourself, so that from inside FileMaker, you'd call on those local large language models instead of going to one of the commercial cloud-based ones. So I will not repeat this one. I will touch on parts of this. This presentation was really all about where do you grab the things that Claris gives us to install these locally, and then going through a full deployment, beginning to end. That's what this presentation was all about. I'm not going to do that because that would take the full hour. You can just go and look at this presentation if you want to see how to install it. Today we'll talk more about the why and the fundamentals behind it. So Claris gives us two features. Two new features on the AI front, right? It's really all about semantic search. It's semantic search against text, which would be this, and semantic search against pictures, which is the newer one that they released in 21.1. If you haven't looked at this too closely, in order to do a semantic search, you have to take the thing that you want to search on, which in this case is a picture, otherwise it would be text. You have to create an embedding of that. And an embedding is nothing too fancy. If I go to here, right, the embedding is in text format, it's a huge array, right? It starts with a square bracket, ends with a square bracket, and it's got what they call these vectors in there. In FileMaker, you can also have it as a container content, which is slightly faster than using the textual format, but sometimes the textual format is better for visualization like this one, right? So something has to create this embedding. And you have to do this for everything that you want to search on. You also have to do that for the search string, the query that you give it, right? If I want to search on a book and I want to find all the books on mental health, right? So I can do that and show you, right? If I want a book, then my question would be something like this, right? It could be any variation of this. The point is that it's a natural language kind of search, right? It's like it's not the same kind of search in FileMaker where I would go into the do a search in the summary field for mental health, right? We know in FileMaker that would produce all the books that have the string mental health in their summary. Semantic search is different, right? Because it'll give you nuances of what you're searching for and look at these books, at the summaries of these books, and give you things that are relevant. All right. So back to embeddings. All right. So embeddings take that summary of a book. This is an embedding of a summary of a book. The summary of a book is a couple of sentences worth of text. This is how it's represented as an embedding. The embedding is produced by a model, right? It's a transformer model that will basically take your input and create this big array of vectors. And models like this have what they call dimensions, right? And there's a couple of other things that are somewhat relevant there, but the dimensions, you can think of them as the number of dimensions is the amount of nuance, if you will, that they can assign to any particular thing. In this case, text, but it could be a picture, for instance, as well. So that's how that looks like under the hood. So we need to have something that can create these embeddings for us when we want to do that kind of semantic search. All right, so these are the configured machine learning model. That's one of the older AI things that have been in FileMaker for a long, long time. I just wanted to mention it because AI in FileMaker isn't exactly brand new. But it's these two, line 15 and 16, that have been introduced with FileMaker 20 and then with FileMaker 21, or introduced with what doesn't really matter. But it's the insert embedding. We had got it for text. Now we have it for pictures. That's really what the core of it is. And then, of course, the end result is you want to perform that kind of semantic search. That is what you can do here with this script step. So that's really what's going on here. In order to get there, you have to configure an AI account. So that's in essence a pointer to where or what you're going to be using to create those embeddings. And when you click here on the provider, there's 3 of them. There used to be 2, depending on, like if you're using FileMaker 21.1, you'll have 3. Otherwise, you'll have 2. In the previous version, we had OpenAI and Custom. Now we have OpenAI, Cohere, and Custom. So Cohere was added with 21.1. Cohere is kind of interesting because they have a fairly generous free tier, a little better than OpenAI, although I haven't looked at it for a month or two. So, and I know this is a very quickly changing landscape, but you can look at those two to see which one is the cheaper if you want to do the commercial ones, right? But that's really the difference here. OpenAI and Cohere are cloud-based commercial providers, and Custom would be the one that you choose if you want to run the local or the large language model locally on your own infrastructure. You can set the logging on and off, but that's really what that means. So when you put it all together and you do this kind of thing called insert embedding, because that's really where most of the heavy-duty interaction with the model is going to happen, because at some points, in order to do any kind of search, like I mentioned, you'll have to go through all of your data and create an embedding for the things you want to search on, which can be a lot, right? Like in my example here, if I go through to the pictures, I have about 60,000 pictures. So I would have to create embeddings for these 60,000 pictures ahead of time before I can do any kind of search on that, right? So keep that in mind, because when we talked about cost, that's really where your cost is going to come from. You'll incur a cost every time you run a search on any of these, but the bulk of the cost initially is going to come from making sure that you have an embedding for all of your existing data before you can do a search on. If I were to do this on, what did I think I looked at Cohere for doing this, and just the initial setup for running this and creating the embeddings would have cost me about $60 or something like that, right? Just as a one-off. Now, in development, you'll probably do it a few times because you'll figure out maybe I need to do a different model or I forgot something. So just with a fairly limited amount of data, you're probably looking at a couple of $100 before you're ready to go, right? So when I mentioned cost, that's sort of like the order of magnitude for a smallish kind of data set as this one. All right, so this is the two script steps that do it. It really, this one does it individually, right? And the one on line 16 is a bulk operation, which will basically look at your found set and create an embedding for everything in your found set. So you can do it on an individual record. You can do it on a bulk set of records. That's really the only difference. The interesting thing about this script step is that it is nothing more than a wrapper around a curl call. Like, because this script step is really the same as an insert from URL with a bunch of parameters that FileMaker has already pre-programmed, if you will. They pre-programmed the endpoint. They pre-programmed the payload that they're sending. It is really nothing more than a call to a microservice, because the OpenAI, you can think of OpenAI as just an API, right? Cohere is the same thing. It's just an API call. Just like you make API calls to any of the other providers that I'm sure you've been using for a while now, calling one of these AI providers is exactly that. It's nothing more than an API call. And FileMaker has created these script steps, and that they're basically just wrappers around an API call. And to show you that when you make one of those embedding calls, the script step, what we're seeing here is Insomnia, same as Postman, if you're more familiar with that, this is exactly what happens. It's an API call. In this case, I'm making it to my local machine. In this case, it would be potentially OpenAI or Cohere, and then V1 embeddings. That is because those script steps in FileMaker are OpenAI compatible. OpenAI, as one of the earlier and big players in the market, has basically set the standard, if you will, for how to make calls. Like, how should the URL look like? What's the payload going to look like? What's the response that they're going to send? What does that look like? So they are the de facto standard for how these calls are made. And under the hood, this is what FileMaker makes of that, right? That one script step basically translates into this. This is the URL, and this is the JSON payload that FileMaker will send. Right? You pick a model. You have picked a model when you created the call there in FileMaker, and you're sending your data. And from a security point of view, this is the crucial part. Right? This is the part that you, I think, at a certain level, we all understand and grok that this is what's happening, but this is what's happening, right? You're sending whatever the data is that you want to create the embedding for. You're sending it to wherever the model is, whether that's in the cloud to OpenAI or Cohere or somewhere on your own network, but that's what you're doing. You're sending your data. The response is over here on the right-hand side, where you get that big array that is the embedding. Right? And then on the FileMaker side, that gets stored, and then that's the basis for doing your searches on. But fundamentally, and this is important, this is what's happening when you create an embedding inside FileMaker. The beauty of this is once you understand that it's nothing more than an API call, if you want to use something that FileMaker doesn't support, it's still just an API call. You can use the insert from URL script step to do this, right? Like if you didn't want to use the insert embedding script step in FileMaker, you could do an insert from URL script step that has the exact same effect, right? So there's nothing special about these two script steps here that you couldn't do from a generic insert from URL call, right? And that's crucial to understand because, like I said, it can open a lot of doors for any other API call or AI API call that you want to make, because fundamentally they pretty much all follow the OpenAI standards, and it's just another API call. With me so far?
Yep.
Yep, all good.
All right. So assuming that I'm have you somewhat convinced that that it's not that hard, and that you want to be as secure as possible, and you may want to save some pennies on and how to put this all together, you've got to deploy this locally. All right. Locally, I mean, it could be somewhere on your own network on-prem. It could be in your own VPC in the cloud that is under your control and tightly governed, all of that. Like, it doesn't have to be local. Your own cloud counts as local too, just like it does when we say on-prem FileMaker server. That could be somewhere in the cloud too. Every FileMaker server comes with the tools that are required to make this happen, right? So this happens to be a Linux box, but it's the same on macOS and Windows. If you look inside the folder structure for your FileMaker server, there is this tools subfolder. If you look into that one, there's this thing here called open source LLM. So that's where it is, where the files are located that you need to create your own microservice for the FileMaker to talk to, because that's what we're doing, right? Like, we're setting up a microservice. It's a small web service that has all the things that you want to behave as if it is OpenAI or Cohere. That's really what's happening there. Now, although the files are in this tools folder on FileMaker server, you do not want to run this on your FileMaker server, right? You do not want that. You need to grab that, put it on some other server that you'll use as your AI server. The reason for that is creating these embeddings is both memory intensive and CPU intensive, or even GPU intensive if you have a good GPU in the machine, right? So you don't want that operation or set of operations to compete for resources with your FileMaker server. It's that intensive. Like, don't do it on your FileMaker server. All right. So these are the same. That's the same folder, but now open in Visual Studio Code so that you can get a sense for what it is. I mentioned it's just like any other API. It's a microservice, and a lot of the things that you find in the AI space are going to be Python-based. Python seems to be the scripting language by choice for a lot of AI stuff, not so much JavaScript. I'll get into that a little bit later. So what FileMaker or Claris has given us to set up our own microservice is a Python-based microservice. You can tell here the PYC is compiled Python. And then there's a Python file like the one that we're looking at here with all the settings that you need to make this work. In that Claris webinar, I go into a lot of detail around security for this, because it actually comes with really good security where you need a token in order to talk to it so that it wouldn't respond to just any call. Also to set up SSL on that microservice. So all of that is covered in that webinar. And I mentioned this very briefly in that webinar too. What Claris has decided to use, like I said, is Python as the scripting language. And like with most of these scripting languages, like JavaScript, if you want to expose whatever your code is as a microservice, more often than not, you'll use a framework for that. And they've chosen Fast API. So Python plus Fast API together creates a very easily to deploy microservice that is basically the wrapper around that large language model that you'll have locally. If you ever done any JavaScript microservices, you'll be familiar with Express as sort of like the framework does the same thing for Node and JavaScript. So if you're somewhat familiar with Express, then Fast API is exactly the same thing, but for Python, right? It's not the only microservice framework for Python. There's a couple of other ones. Flask would be one, just like Express isn't the only one for JavaScript, but that's really all that is. All right, so you'd copy these files over to another machine. Now, of course, this being Python, you're somewhat limited to the types of machine you can do that without having to jumping through hoops, especially on the Windows side, right? Python doesn't come naturally on Windows. You can install it. It can be a little tricky to do that very well on Windows. It works natively on Linux and on Mac OS if you want to go that way. So just keep that in mind. Yep, not a whole lot I need to say about that one here. At the end of the day, and this is something that I cover a little bit in that webinar as well. Again, if you're familiar with the JavaScript-based microservice and Express, you know that you can just write the code and then deploy it. You need to be able to run these things as an actual server, meaning they have to run as a background service, right? Just like FileMaker Server is a background service or a collection of background services. It's the same thing with this one. I typically use PM2 for this, which is Process Manager 2. It's not the only one, but it's an open source tool. It's production grade. It's very solid. And what it allows you to do is basically take that thing, and in my case, it's the one with ID number 2. And as you can see, it's online, it's running. That's really just that thing that Claris has given us. I just went through the Python file with all the settings, configured it to my heart's content, and basically just ran it as a PM2 process. So now it's running in the background and it's good to go. As you can see here, you might not think that's a lot. It's sitting idle. I haven't called it yet, but it's consuming about 100 megabytes. If I start running embeddings against this, especially when I do picture embeddings, this is going to grow to a couple of gigabytes and then scale back down. All right, so and that's why I said don't run this on your FileMaker server, especially if you'll be doing a lot of embeddings and you have a lot of data. This is going to compete with your FileMaker server, and you definitely do not want to do that. All right. So in a nutshell, and again, you'll see the full walkthrough step by step in that Claris webinar on how to get to this point, right? Where you have the microservice that Claris has built for us, how you have that deployed and accepting requests from your FileMaker server. Oh, not from your FileMaker server, from your FileMaker application. And that'll look like something like this, right? In this case, like I mentioned, and let's go back in here really quick. The sequence is you have to call this script step first at some point, right? Because that'll establish the thing that you're going to call, whatever this account name that you're going to give it here. This is the one that you'll be calling here as well, right? So, oops, did not want to do that. All right, so you'll give it a name. When I do custom, I'll have to give it an endpoint, right? So the endpoint is going to be something like this, because again, it's just it's just an API, right? So you have to give it a URL where your AI server lives. In this case, just HTTPS server. If you're running on a weird port, you'd have to specify that too. Again, this is nothing specific about AI. This is just how you configure any connection to any API. And then you'll have to tell it what API call to use. Remember in that settings file, I mentioned you can configure it to accept only SSL and a particular token that basically, with that token, you can prove that you're authorized to call your AI endpoints, right? So those are the moving bits that you would put in here. And then again, the name that you put in here is the name that you're going to reference every time that you want to do a call to the endpoints, right? When I want to do an embedding, I would go in here and say this is the server that I want to do, and then the model that you want to use, whatever the model is, and then inputs, right? So the name refers to the configure AI account script step that you configured earlier. That's how it all works. Right, so this is the example that I use in the webinar right here, where I do use the custom provider, and this is the URL of where my local LLM is running. Right? It's I'm using internal DNS. I'm using HTTPS because I want the everything in transit to be secure and encrypted. I am using a custom ports, and I have a specific API key that I want to use. And of course, I want to set up all my logging, because that's how you set up the configuration. And then the rest is as I mentioned, it's fairly straightforward. I have my the name that I have, the model that I'm choosing, the data that I'm sending, and where the embedding needs to go. That's really how that piece all works. So at that point, it doesn't really matter which provider that you use, the custom one or the commercial ones. You're just going to send some data, and you'll get an embedding back. A quick word on the models. You'll see this one referenced in the FileMaker documentation a bit too. Hugging Face is a repository, if you will, of a lot of these models, where you can find information on how to call them. There's often not a lot of stuff here for FileMaker developers to make sense of. You could use this to see how popular it is, right? It's almost like NPM or any other package manager, where you can look at these things and say, is this even widely used? What does it do? The code examples are all Python, right? So if you were to write your own microservice and you want to use one of these models, it'll tell you how to do it. Again, well, I'm not going to say, again, as FileMaker developer, you're probably going to stick with the models that Claris tells in the README, tells us that have been tested, that are working well, and should adhere to. But if you want to use any other model, you can certainly come in here, find out what the specific, I guess, criteria are, or the specific things that any of these models bring to the table. And it could be, say, more dimensions. Remember, dimensions are the amount of nuance that they can attach to the thing that you are embedding to your picture or your blurb of text. And typically, the more dimensions it has, the better it is going to be at interpreting what you're asking, right? Something that has not a lot of nuance will maybe not give you the right results as you're intending, right? So you can certainly experiment with different models to figure out the questions that you would typically ask, or that your users would typically ask of the data. How close do I get? Which brings us back a little bit to the cost aspect of this. When you put something like this together, where you have your data or your pictures that you want to search on, you can see here there's two different models that I can choose from. When I go to my book lists, I have a few more here. As a developer, it's very likely that you'll be experimenting with some of these different models to see, again, depending on the nature and the type of the questions that people will be asking of your data, which ones gives you the best result. But the more that you switch models, the more that you'll have to do embeddings, the more it's going to cost you when you do this against OpenAI or Cohere, right? Like I said, very quickly you'll get into hundreds of dollars just to experiment with different models and figuring out which one is the closest to what you need to do. And it may be obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. When you embed something with a particular model, when you ask a question, you have to embed the question with the same model, right? So models are not interchangeable. You cannot embed the question with this model if all of your data is embedded with the other model. Like, it's not going to produce the results that you're after, right? So the question and the data have to be embedded using the same model. Any questions so far on any of this?
No, all good.
All right. So I mentioned the fact that fundamentally what Claris has given us to run these LLMs locally is nothing more than a microservice, right? I think that's the fundamental concept, because the insert embedding script step is just a wrapper around making an API call, just like what we do here, right? So if we keep that in mind, if we want to use something that doesn't come from Claris, if we say as FileMaker developers, we are a little more proficient in JavaScript than we are in Python. And at this point, I don't want to pick up Python if I'm in need of a development project right now. I don't want to go to the Python learning curve, or I don't feel comfortable with that. You can create your microservice in JavaScript. And I have one over here. This JavaScript microservice basically does the exact same thing as the Claris one does, right? So functionally, it's one-on-one with what Claris has given us, except that this one, the code base is in JavaScript. Or you may be a .NET developer, or a Ruby developer, or a Java developer, not JavaScript, but Java, right? So the tech stack to create these microservices that you want to deploy locally for exposing some of these AI functionality, those could be anything. Granted, most of the examples that you'll find out there on the internet are going to be Python based, because it's the de facto language for a lot of this AI stuff, but it doesn't need to be, right? So you can stick to your own tech stack for writing these things to use as a local LLM engine, and it could be anything. Like this is JavaScript. It really could be anything that you want. As I mentioned, if you go look for a model and you go in Hugging Face, most of the examples, and this drives home that point, right? So most of the examples you'll find are going to be Python, but it's certainly and absolutely not limited to Python at all. All right. The feedback that I got after doing that webinar with FileMaker or with Claris on doing that is I was using a Linux box. Most of my FileMaker servers are on Linux, that kind of thing. My development machine is a Mac OS, so it's same as Linux for all intents and purposes for doing these things. If you've seen the webinar, I'm sure that you'll agree. If you haven't seen it, you'll probably get that sense after you've seen it. It's fairly involved, right? It's not too difficult to take that example that Claris has given us and basically deploy it so that you get to this place, right? Where it just runs in the background. It's governed by PM2 and all of that stuff, right? If I ask for a show of hands, and if I would ask the people here, like, have you used PM2? Have you deployed your own microservice? A lot of us would probably say no, right? Like obviously we're aware of microservices and what they can do for us, but having deployed them is probably something that not too many of us have done. I have a blog post that covers a lot of these things, or if you're interested in getting closer to that, I have one both on building, but also the act of deploying your microservice all the way to that PM2 end stage. So if you want to learn and read up on that stuff, the information certainly is available. But it's fairly involved. Like if this is the first time that you'll deploy something like that, there is a learning curve, right? I'm not going to pretend that there isn't. For me, it's close to second nature because I do so many microservices. But for many standard FileMaker developers, this is not something that they'll do gladly. They'll look at it and understand the reasons why. They can even see where they can get to it, but they might find themselves turning away from it regardless, just because of the unknown, right? Like a lot of people are not comfortable on the command line doing these kinds of things. So I totally get it. The good news is that clearly Claris is going to work on this, right? At some point, we can expect some of this to be rolled into, say, the admin console or a standalone tool where it's basically just a one-click deploy within the installer, and you'll have a local LLM server. That is down the road. If you want to get some of these things now, you can do that too. There's a couple of big names in this space. One of them is LM Studio. Another one is Olama. I know that Ian has worked with that a lot. Another one is Jan. I have LM Studio on this machine here. I don't particularly like their interface. It's a little busy. It's actually very, very busy. But two things, right? It allows you to download models very quickly. Like I don't have to go to that Hugging Face web space and find out like what models am I even looking for? How do I download this thing? Like how does this all work? This one allows you a nice interface to look for these models and do that. But this is the most interesting part, right? LM Studio can act as a local server without having to go through all of these mechanics of downloading the files from FileMaker, putting them on your own machine. Still, again, you wouldn't do this on your FileMaker server machine either. You would still pick another machine. But this takes a lot of the sting out of having to understand how to do things from the command line, install PM2, understanding the PM2 command line a little bit to restart things and start these things. So tools like Ollama, LM Studio, Jan, they can take that sting out of it and give you the ease of use and the graphical interface to deploy a lot of these things very easily, right? Would I use this in production? I personally probably wouldn't, right? This is a great development tool because you go from 0 to 60 in no time flat, right? Like it's you'll have, and the key is that this is an OpenAI like or OpenAI compatible local server, because that's exactly what FileMaker needs, right? FileMaker is using, when it translates that insert embedding script step into an API call, it is using the OpenAI standard. So that's the thing to remember. You couldn't use something that isn't OpenAI compatible, but this one is, and Ollama is. So pretty much, like I said, all of them are, but that would be something to look for. So as a developer, if you want to get going quickly, this is probably a better way than doing it the Claris way by downloading all of these Python files and deploying them. That's probably how I would encourage my developers to go if you want to have something quickly. I would want them to understand what that looks like under the hood, because I think understanding the mechanics of it all is important, because when you read stuff that isn't necessarily Claris related, you'll be able to much better make an assertion whether this is something that you can use or cannot use, right? So with this, you can use different things than just these semantic search. That's really what I'm building up towards, right? Like the FileMaker native features are about semantic search and creating embeddings to facilitate that semantic search. If you want to use different AI functionality that isn't necessarily just about semantic search, from inside FileMaker, it's really just an API call away, right? It's an insert from URL script step call away. You just need something to call, and the something that you would call could be something that you basically stand up with LM Studio or Jan or Ollama and do it that way, right? So that's really how you can expand your AI thinking or go look for those AI use cases that go over and beyond just embeddings for semantic search, right? There's a lot more use cases, and I'm sure Ian has quite a few, and so does Chris, that you can use for this. So that's really what I was wanted to convey today, right? So to recap, I wanted to show you the mechanics of how these AI calls from inside FileMaker, what they look like. Right? They look like just another API call. It's an and while we have dedicated script steps for that, you can easily replace them functionally 100% with insert from URL script steps from inside FileMaker. Right? You want to deploy your LLMs locally. I think, as I mentioned way back in the beginning, for me that's the default state. Why? Because it's a lot more secure. Nothing ever leaves your premises, and it's a lot more cost effective. By the way, what are you giving up? You're probably giving up, I guess, the ability to run the absolute state-of-the-art models, right? Because these are going to be proprietary to OpenAI Cohere. you're not going to have access to those. So you're sort of limited to the open source AI models, but those are pretty darn good. I would dare say good enough for pretty much all of the use cases that you would want to think about right now. All right, so you deploy locally for cost reasons, for security reasons. You can do it the Claris way. That webinar that I've done will guide you all the way through, or you can use a tool like LM Studio, Gen, or Llama to accelerate that process, right? To get from 0 to being able to call that probably inside an hour. If you've never done this before, I'm pretty sure you can get up and running inside an hour. You'll have to find your way around finding the right model and whatnot, but at least you wouldn't have to worry about setting up or scaffold the infrastructure so that you have a server that will respond to those calls that you make from inside FileMaker. So that's it. That's what I wanted to show you today. So let me know if you have any questions.
That's great, Wim. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. Well, I hope there'll be lots of questions. If you wanted to, I've got one. If you wanted to change you said that you wouldn't have all the latest features for your model. So if you wanted to then update your system with something which had some more features because they're now available to everyone within this sort of framework, would that be easy to do?
It would be. You would have to, a couple of things you would have to change, right? So for instance, let's see if I can find this one real quick. Yeah. We're looking here at the Python code from Claris, right? So in that configuration settings, in the configuration file, there is a query model and different settings from models. So you could change it here, right? So you'd switch it over so that any new calls you make would use the new model. Now, there's a difference between something like this, which is just a query model, like a chat GPT, if you will, right? Because that one is just asking questions. You ask a question, you get an answer. It doesn't really work with your data unless you want to ask questions about your data. And that's different than any embedding model, right? Remember, with embedding models, in order to ask questions of your data has to be embedded first. Right? Because it's really the embedding, that big array, that is being used to search on. So, and also remember, when I said when you ask a question, it has to use the same model as the embedding for your data. So if you switch embedding models, you have to re-embed all of your data in the newest model. Again, from a cost perspective, if you run this locally, it just takes the time that it takes. There's no extra cost to it except running through it. If you're doing this with a commercial provider, it's going to cost you, right? Because you'll have to pay for whatever, however many credits or whatever they charge you with for re-embedding your data.
Great, thanks. Anyone else?
Tony, go ahead.
I might have heard my name. The awesome presentation. I posted 2 questions. I think Ian answered one of them, which is that choosing the right LLM is a bit science and a bit art, depending on the nature of your data set as well as your budget, because some free, some not. I think that's a good answer, Wim, unless you want to riff off that.
No, there's one thing sort of related to that, is something to keep in mind as you pick your models. I mentioned the dimensions, right? That's the amount of nuance that they can assign to something. Most models have another parameter, if you will, although that's a poor choice of words for models, is most of them are limited to a particular input length, right? Like if you have all of the King James Bible and you want to embed that as one go, that's not going to fly because it's too long, right? So depending on the model, you may have to craft what it is that you're embedding towards what the model can handle. For pictures, it's typically going to be a maximum size of the picture that it's going to be willing to accept. For text, it's typically the length of the text that you want to do. But yeah, so along those same lines.
So awesome. That just one more question, and that's a perfect lead in. So with the disclaimer that I did quit my multidimensional vector space mathematics at uni and switched over to economics, which means I know a tiny bit, enough to be dangerous. I did post a question because I am mathematically curious. The embedding that you showed, Wim, looked to me to be a big sequence of numbers, which I take, and correct me when I'm wrong here, which I take to be a mathematical representation of the vectors and dimensions. And so you embed your data in order to search. So I'd imagine your search query is equally embedded, and then it's algorithmically, mathematically combined using some fancy n-dimensional vector space. I'm kind of curious, is that how it works under the hood?
Pretty much, like every number in this array is a dimension, and it's a score between -1 and +1, right? So every number is one of those nuances, if you will, right? Like whatever the model is trained on to assign nuance to whatever you think. I don't know how many this one has, probably like 300 and something. Like that, right? So every number represents a representation of one of the nuances on a scale from -1 to +1. The way that FileMaker does the similarity search is basically it's called cosine similarity, right? So the math model behind that is it's going to look at every number in this array and do a cosine similarity search across that.
Okay, very, very cool. And thanks, Ian, and thanks, Wim.
A little side note on that formula. At Engage last year, Wade, you said, in his demo, he showed the formula and he said, well, now you can do this, but we've done it for you, so just do it. Just use it. You don't need to know the math, but it is definitely a large formula.
Yep. I remember seeing that too, but yeah.
The only thing to add to that is that the FileMaker cosine similarity will only work correctly if you've got normalized vectors, i.e., as Wim said, if the values are between -1 and 1. So not all embedding models produce normalized vectors. So if you're using a different model, you need to test it and make sure that it does produce normalized vectors. Yep.
And the other thing, again, it may be obvious, but unless you've played with it, you probably will not have run into it. My data set here for my pictures, the one that I used in ETS for 21.1, it's not a huge set, like 60,000 pictures. If you have clients that work a lot with pictures of any kind, they'll have way more than this. So and you got to store this embedding somewhere, right? Like it's and as I was playing with this originally, when we just had the text embedding, I had my books over here, and I was storing the embeddings in a related table so that I can have one embedding per model per book, so that it, depending on what model I wanted to use for my search, it would find a matching embedding to do the search on, which was one way of working with different models at the same time, if you will. This actually didn't work all that well, because when you do a search on that, the search is based on the table occurrence of where your embeddings are. So I find myself having to do the found set here and then jump back to here to get to my books exactly, right? So not that that's a huge hoop to jump through, but it's something that caught me by surprise, because I probably, from a purist point of view, I wouldn't want to store my embedding on the record itself. Like that didn't make a lot of sense to me. But it's one of the considerations that you'll have to make. In addition to, FileMaker isn't a computational workhorse, like a powerhouse, like it never has been, right? And this is all about math, and this is about doing math at a fairly high level, and also doing a lot of searches across these embeddings. They're arrays, but the textual representation of them is fairly big, right? Like I mentioned you could store it in a container field, which is slightly faster. Where I'm going with this is, if your data set is any reasonable size, doing these kinds of searches isn't very fast, right? So it's definitely something that you would want to play with and experiment with to see at what level is it acceptable to do all of this in FileMaker. And if it's not acceptable because of speed in FileMaker, you can still do a lot of these same things. You just need to push it a little more to an actual API integration where you don't store the embeddings in FileMaker, but you store the embeddings in specialized databases, because they now exist, specialized databases, and Ian can talk about this a lot more than I can, that specialize in storing and processing embeddings, right? Just like I mentioned that at some point, Claris will take this Python file that is now a manual installation and make it a lot more seamless, and maybe through the admin console like that. It wouldn't surprise me if at some point we see some sort of like vector database in the FileMaker space. And it's not going to be part of the Draco engine, I don't think so, but it could be something that is going to be close to what we now have in Studio, right? It could be a Postgres variant that is based in the cloud that is going to be used as the vector database for all of these embeddings, and then hopefully tightly integrated with what we can do in FileMaker. So there's a lot of things that are going to happen, I think, in this space in FileMaker in the next couple of years that are going to be really interesting.
Hey, can I jump in with one more thing, Wim? I see you're using some suffixes on your TOs, _AC and
Yep.
_ACD. Is that allow, create, and delete?
Yes.
I'm very happy to see that. I also see the _GT. You've made my day.
Happy to oblige. Yep. So the point that I was making about performance, don't take that lightly, right? Like if you have hundreds of thousands of records that you want to process, definitely test. Test whether that is going to be performant enough for your purposes. And like I said, that doesn't close the door on using AI from inside FileMaker, not at all. It just means that you'll have to go about it a slightly different way. And it's going to be a lot more like an actual API integration, which is part of the reason that I wanted to show you how much this already is an API integration. It's just abstract a little bit by the way that FileMaker chose to give us these script steps, but it's really just an API integration, which sometimes makes the thinking a little easier to expand into a more full-fledged API integration, like I'm sure like Ian is doing.
Anyone got any more questions for Wim? I'm sure everyone will think of them about 5 minutes after.
I think everyone will do. Everyone will look at that great presentation, Wim. I'm thinking about we'd use this at FileMaker for FP and stuff like that. So we get clients sometimes, well, more licensors. It's known that you've used a certain asset of a certain kind. So for us, for example, how many covers have Spider-Man on it, or how many covers have Superman on it? And to me, this is the thing that is always a pain to do. So we categorize our stuff internally ourselves. So I don't know whether AI is there with that yet, but it's certainly interesting to see what's coming down the pipe. I think there's going to be lots of options for that. So
I'm actually not sure that particular model is I don't know. It's probably not up and running. Yep, sorry about that. I was actually very happy with the local LM model for pictures, right? Because you can do tags on your pictures, and if you have any database of pictures, you know how much of a pain that is.
Yeah.
The results for doing semantic searches on pictures works brilliantly. Like if you just show me colorful abstracts, or like what I was just trying to type in, gloomy day, or multiple birds on a wire, right? Like it'll produce meaningful results very quickly, to the point that you may not want to do tags anymore on your pictures. So I was very happy with the way that particular piece works. For me, doing semantic search on pictures makes a lot more sense than doing semantic search on data.
Yeah.
The reason for that is, if you have a book like this where a category and a name and an author, for the embedding or for the search on embeddings to make sense, the semantic search to make sense, you have to create it as a story, right? Because it's the blurb, the single or a couple of sentences that will get assigned the nuances from your model before doing searches make sense. Like if you only have this to search on, or if this is a CRM and you have first name, last name, that's not a story, right? Like semantic searches on those kinds of fields don't really make a lot of sense unless you express it as a more of a story, which is why most of the demos that you'll see are something like this with books or movies, right? Something that tells a story more so than an invoice record, right? But certainly you can do it, right? Because on your invoice record, you can create a story that says this is an invoice for these products, or this is an invoice for these clients, or if it's a contact, you could say this is a contact, and the contact is a company, and the name is such and so, and they're in this industry. But you have to create, for best results, you have to create a story for your data before you embed it, before you can do searches on it.
So for us, for example, we've got essentially every book we've published, we've got our own CRM in FileMaker, which has got the full bibliographical short information, the long information that's on the back of the book, the synopsis of the book. We've got all that information centrally. So that's what you would push through the embedding. You wouldn't push the title, the author, and so forth. You just push the core text that explains that story, in effect, of what that book contains. Yeah,
exactly. And you can put some structure to your story, right? Like you say, this is a book whose title is right. So and then add the blurb to that, so that at least your story has a bit of structure. When you ask a question like, find me all the books whose title is in this thing, right? Then the embedding will typically be not entirely structured the same way, but it's going to be closer to the structure that you want.
Okay, cool, really good.
Just to add to that, Gary, what you can do is use a combination of keyword search and semantic search. So for example, if you're interested in a particular type of story, you might search first for, say, graphic novels, filter down to graphic novels, then perform a semantic search within that found set, and that'll get you better performance.
Okay.
Versus doing a semantic search across the whole set of everything, which, I mean, you can do, but it's just the combination gives you more capabilities. I mean, these are all tools we can use and combine in different ways.
And again, I suppose that's all relative to the actual data set. So if you're talking 100 titles, it doesn't really matter if you do a semantic search. If you're doing 500,000 titles, it's a very different ballpark that you're going into. So it makes sense to filter down to a smaller set and then getting down to the detail set of the matches after that.
Actually, I was just thinking what I'll do is, while I don't have sort of a proper presentation planned, I'll just show you a couple of things I found on performance in terms of how it scales before I get into what I was proposing to show, just because I think, just based on what we've been discussing, you'll probably find it interesting.
Yeah, cool. Brilliant.
Yeah, I had a related question on performance as well, actually. I noticed that most of your summaries are a brief paragraph. So if you're in the sort of situation that Gary's got with all the blurb from the back, all the blurb from the inside cover, does that make a significant difference if you're searching across a large number of records?
One of the considerations that you'll have to make there is what the model is willing to accept as to the length of what you're sending it, right? So if you have a fairly lengthy synopsis and you want to add some more stuff to that, it may be more than the model can accept, or you'll lose part of what you're sending anyway as it creates the embedding, right? So different strategies around that. It would be maybe use different models for different lengths of your synopsises, right? Like you can have a mini synopsis and then a lengthier synopsis, and you use different models, and then depending on what you want to search, as what Ian was saying, like you use a sort of like a layered approach to get the best performance for what you're searching for as you're searching for it. But typically, of course, the bigger the embedding is, right, the more dimensions it has, the slower it's going to be to search on. But like with most things in FileMaker, we understand conceptually that it's going to be slower, but how much is slower? Some of that is going to be based on the resources available to FileMaker, the client or the server, that kind of thing, right? So so a lot of this needs to be tested out.
On the customer as well, because maybe they're to have a delay if they can search easily across a large number of data points.
Yep.
Sorry.
I think that does go to what you were saying, Joel. If your scenario of what you're trying to achieve needs to be instant, you're going to have to work with the data set to make it there. If it's a matter of, oh, I'm doing a search and it can come back in 5 minutes with all my results, 9 times out of 10, you're probably within that boundary of being able to do the search across pretty much any data set, because it will respond within time. So I think it's all relative to what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Really good presentation. Thanks, Wim.
Yeah,
Thank you.
excellent, Wim. Really clear as well. Thank you.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Has anyone else got any questions, or shall we move on to Ian if you're ready? I guess that sounds like we're going to move on to Ian.
I think we are.
Are you ready, Ian?
Yeah, I guess I'm as ready as I'll ever be. Okay,
Thanks for coming last minute.
But it is a bit last minute, so I don't have a specific presentation prepared. But what I will do is I'll show you a couple of things that I showed in Malmö to Engage EU. I won't show my whole presentation from there, but I will show a couple pieces of it. But I think what I'll do is I'll start off by just following on from the performance stuff we've been discussing. This is from a talk I gave quite a while ago. I'll just look at the performance for a second. And what I've done is it compares the timing for performing embedded searches on 1024 dimensions. This was running on my Mac Mini M1 server with 16 gigs of RAM. So it's a pretty minimal server. And on the horizontal axis, we've got the number of records, and the vertical axis, how long it takes in seconds to run the search. So you can see that it's actually pretty linear, that anything less than about 30,000 records, it was performing in under a second. So that's pretty good. And it was performing searches on up to 100,000 records in under 3 seconds, which is, again, that's for that number of records, that's probably acceptable in most cases. Bear in mind, this is just me, just the one client. So if a number of people were hitting this all simultaneously, it would doubtless be considerably slower. So it's not, it just to give a bit of a relative sense of how the performance looks. And if we increase the number of records, you can see that at 500,000 records, it's now up to about 12 seconds. So that's the point at which that's, from a user perspective, that's far too long. That's not really going to be acceptable. But the interesting thing is it's quite linear. And when I spoke to the developers at Claris, they said that's pretty much what they would expect. However, when I reach 700,000 records, you can see there's an enormous jump, that it goes from 15 seconds to 25 seconds to perform a search. And I'm not 100% certain, but I'm pretty sure this is what's happening when the server is running out of RAM, and the server basically at that point starts swapping to try to perform the search. So, so the performance seems to be pretty good up to say 100,000 records, but beyond that, then you might want to. So it's going to be something you have to test yourself. Anyway, I just thought that might be of interest and sort of give a little bit of context to the performance.
Can I ask a quick question here?
Yeah.
Would it be possible? You mentioned that this would slow down with multiple users. Is it?
Yes, I would expect so.
Is it possible to detect when there's more than one query coming in and pass that off to different to services on different servers?
Well, FileMaker server, this is performing the native semantic search on FileMaker server. So it can't be passed off to different servers.
Okay.
This is, if we were talking to an API, then yeah, we could hand off to different servers. And by way of comparison, when I ran the same test on PostgreSQL with the vector embedding extension, the searches were sort of 10 to 15 times as fast.
Okay.
So FileMaker is by no means the fastest thing for this kind of thing. However, the feature is really, really lovely, and it's very FileMaker-like, if you will. That when you perform the semantic search, it gives you back a found set. That found set is sorted by semantic similarity, with the closest being the first in the sort order. And you can also now request a JSON file that will give you a list of record IDs and the proximity, again, ranked by cosine similarity. So there's a few more tools coming around that sort of area. And so anyway, just given we were talking about that, I just wanted to sort of show that because it seemed to be sort of like a good follow-on.
Ian, one quick question I have with you on that. And obviously, you're saying you're running it on an M1, that's fine. But if you were running that on a Mac Studio, which has got 40 GPU cores,
that would be a chunk, that would be considerably faster.
Yeah, because I was just going to say, because if it's all computational, it's going to be the GPU that's going to pick up the load on that, not the CPU. So
exactly. And in fact, this when you perform semantic search, whenever possible, it will hand it off to the server to perform the search. If you're searching through a relationship, it can't do that. So if you perform your search on the context of the embedding itself, then it's going to be really fast because that can happen directly on the server.
Yeah.
And it takes network because embeddings are really, really big. So if you think a string of numbers is 1024 dimensions long, that's a big chunk of text to hand back, and hand 100,000 of those across the network. That's a lot of network traffic. So if you can perform it on the server, it's going to be much, much faster. And they have optimized it to perform on the server whenever possible.
Okay, cool.
So, but yeah, absolutely.
Well, the numbers are really good, mate, because I think that's the point, is that there is a threshold, and the nice thing is it is linear. So it's a scale that you can live with. Okay, if the server runs out of RAM, absolutely you're going to get a spike. But
yeah. So obviously Mac Studio going to be like a ton faster than that.
Yeah.
On a similar note, I'll show you what happens if you hand. Okay, as Wim said, I do a lot of my stuff with Ollama, running locally, and if I show you here, we don't want that one. Whoops, no. We're not interested in the overall approach strategy, not today. Nor are we interested in that. But this shows you in Ollama I didn't mean to do that, but we'll ignore that for the moment. What I did was I asked Ollama to generate a Python script to count from 1 to 10 and back down to 0. The top one is running on my MacBook M1, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and you can see that it took a total of 5 seconds and generated 49 tokens per second. So that basically is being handed off to a GPU, all being done on GPU. When I ran that, it used 100% of my GPU.
Yeah.
The lower one is what happened when I ran that on my iMac, my Intel iMac, that doesn't have a GPU, or rather it doesn't have a GPU that Ollama can use. And admittedly, I used the Llama 70B model, which used all of the RAM available. But you can see that it took 10 hours to do the same thing.
Oh my God.
GPUs make a tremendous difference. I know it's not a fair comparison because I've used a much larger model and it was running out of RAM. However, GPUs do make a tremendous difference for this kind of thing, for performance.
Cool.
So,
Nice.
Anyway, that kind of that. I'll just I don't want that on there, so I'll close that. So I'll just see. Were there any other questions before I move on?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, cool. What I'll do then is I'll show you the first a part of my my Malmö presentation. And I was talking about two things. I was talking about RAG, retrieval augmented generation, and large language model tools in FileMaker. You guys all know me, so just a photo. I was like the world's worst hockey player when I was a kid growing up in Canada. And I based this talk, I looked at the ThoughtWorks, which is a sort of a major tech think tank. If you've ever read any of Martin Fowler's books, he's one of the senior people there. And they put out an annual technology radar looking at technology landscape. And they looked at techniques that broken up into things that you might want to adopt or trial or assess. And they're saying that at this point, pardon me, we actually want to be adopting retrieval augmented generation, which is kind of the semantic search we've been looking at. I won't go into a lot of the detail on that right here, but what I wanted to talk about was function calling with large language models. And this is a big part of how AI agents work. And I should say that the techniques I'm going to show are all achievable within FileMaker with current shipping product. Also, everything here was running on a local large language model, almost all talking to Ollama. In a couple of cases, I've written my own API in Python. So I tend to go with Python for just about all my API needs. So there's no connection to OpenAI or Anthropic. It was all running locally. And I'll skip over this stuff. Actually, we'll pause here. Why semantic search? Because it makes the searches context sensitive. So I just ran across this example before I did my presentation. Sorry if I'm a bit scattered, but if we look at Netflix, if I do a search on Netflix for films with a strong female lead, this is kind of what I hope to get back. I expect to get something like this, Devil Wears Prada, Alien, Kill Bill, that kind of thing. However, this is what Netflix gives me. This basically says no matches. So you can see they're doing keyword search entirely. Whereas if it was done in semantic search and keyword search, then it would actually have given me something useful. So that was kind of one use case I was thinking where it would have been really nice if they'd implemented that. And I don't understand why they haven't. In any event, I'll skip on. I've got a load of use cases. So LLM and tool calling, and where do they fit? So as I said, originally I said that I was going to talk about agents in my talk. And if I kind of make a distinction between an AI agent, so AI agents, they're designed to work autonomously to achieve goals, and they can take advantage of tools. Tools are basically function calls with LLMs, and it allows you to integrate large language models with external functions, APIs, or tools. So what you can do is, I don't have it in this presentation, but I will show you afterwards. Claude, the desktop application. Anthropic has released an open source agent model that they call MCP, Model Context Protocol. And I'll show you an example of the Claude desktop application talking to my local FileMaker server. So it allows you to obviously, the large language model knows nothing about what's on my FileMaker server, but by using this protocol, it allows me to communicate between the two. So again, the distinction, agents are autonomous, goal-oriented, adaptive, proactive, and persistent, whereas tools are very focused, they're very limited scope, they're reactive, and they basically do something, and then they're done. So tools will take an input, have some process, and have an output. And an agent, I would change this diagram. It's not exactly accurate, but you could say that an agent is a system built of tools. And I'm going to have a much a more thorough presentation outlining some of the architectures that go into agents fairly soon. So we've got multiple potential architectures for agents, but we'd need an orchestrator, something to orchestrate to organize these tools. And that can actually be in FileMaker. Because FileMaker has a scripting language that can talk to APIs, that means it can talk to large language models and function in that way. And the demo I'm going to show you shows a simple pattern called the router pattern, and it's implemented in FileMaker. And I'm not certain if computer audio will play through, but I will try. Tell me which tools are available in this FileMaker application. Sorry, could everyone hear that? Yes? Okay, great.
Very,
Yes,
very
it was
lightly,
faint.
yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure how to adjust the volume on that, but essentially what I'm doing here is I've got a FileMaker thing. I'm just issuing an audio command to it. It translates that, transcribes it, hands off to a large language model running on a llama, and it comes back and it tells me which tools it's able to call. Okay, I'm interested in historic sales for sweatshirts. It's transcribed that, and it's now going to again hand off, and it's basically run a FileMaker. The LLM has come back with the script to run. Show me the sales for green sweatshirts. So it's basically running FileMaker scripts that come back from the results of the LLM calls. Now show me the CEO salary. And in that case, it knows that it's not able to, that there's no tool available for it to give us the CEO salary. So I'm going to go through sort of step by step how this all works. So what we saw was real-time audio transcription using Whisper. Again, I was running Whisper on an API locally on my Mac. FileMaker calling a local LLM, which was running in Ollama. And then FileMaker was using tools from the local LLM. And then the LLM was basically, the FileMaker script did not decide which scripts to run based on the input, but the LLM told FileMaker which scripts to run. So the basic process is we ask a user question, we tell it which tools are available, we combine that into a prompt, and we send it to the LLM. So we're using FileMaker, JavaScript in the web viewer, Whisper for transcription, fast API, as Wim mentioned earlier, is what I wrote the API in. And we're using Ollama for embedding and the large language model. And then step by step, so when the user starts recording, the recording is happening with JavaScript in a web viewer. When we start recording, the web viewer and JavaScript requests access to the microphone on my computer. And then what it's doing is, if I grant access, it basically is recording the audio into 8K audio chunks. It's initiating a WebSocket connection to my fast API. And then that API is detecting when the speech stops. And when the speech stops, it then calls to a Whisper model locally again on the computer. And I'm using the Whisper Tiny model. So Whisper, the Tiny model on my computer actually is fast enough to do real-time transcription. If I use the large model, it's more accurate, but it can't necessarily quite keep up in real time. So again, a faster computer would solve that. So it then returns the transcribed text back to the web viewer. And then the web viewer basically calls the FileMaker script, sticks that into a field, and we've got text in the field the same as if a user typed it in. I just did the recording because it's much cooler. And we then send the user prompt to an LLM. So the LLM is running an Ollama. So the FileMaker script is sending a JSON request to Ollama. And we're asking the LLM which tools can handle that user prompt. We tell it which model to use. We tell it what tools are available. And we tell it what the user asked in our prompt. And tools in this case, the tools are all FileMaker scripts. So what we've got is we've got a script called view historic sales and the description. And then we tell it what parameters the script takes. And we're building up a JSON description of the tool. And in this case, we've got three FileMaker scripts that are our tools. And so we've got a calc field that describes it in the correct format. This is what we need to know. We need the parameters, the name, the description. And yeah, so we basically, which parameters are mandatory. And we need to use a model that supports tool calling. Ollama recently added tool calling, and the most recent Llama models all support calling tools. And this is roughly what our prompt looks like. We've got the format, JSON. It's really, really important that you tell it the format is JSON. It has to be JSON or it won't work at all. Again, the model has to be one that supports tools. Llama 3.1 does. And then, pardon me, the user input or the user is basically our prompt. We're saying stream false. We don't want to stream results. We want to get the results back in one big thing. And then we also have to pass in the system prompt. And our system prompt has two parts, kind of an overall instruction. And then for each tool we're passing, we need to give it the script name, list of parameters, the name required, true, false, and the type, whether it's string or numeric. And so it looks like this. So saying the typical you're a helpful assistant takes a question, finds the most appropriate tool or tools to execute, along with the parameters to run the tool. If you cannot find a tool, you're to respond as JSON with the following schema, and we need to pass in the schema that we want to get back. And then you can see here that what we've got is that our parameters is basically a nested JSON object of the script names, the script descriptions, and the parameters. The script description is really important because that's what the large language model uses to decide which script do I want to run. And so it looks a bit like this in a slightly larger. And then for each tool, you can see the detail again, the description, the name, the parameters is a list of parameters. And you can see in this case that the product name is required. You can see that I've added things like in the description for the parameter saying always return the product name in the singular form. T-shirts are referred to as a T. It can get quite persnickety about this kind of stuff. And do not include the color in the product name because I want to pass the color as a separate parameter. And then the tool describes how to call a FileMaker script. And we use the FileMaker perform script by name function to call a script when we get our answer back from the LLM, which is a technique that I'm sure everybody's used to already. We perform script by name, we pass in the parameters as JSON. This all needs to be quite rigidly structured, but it's all very doable within the FileMaker tools. So basically, overall, what we're doing is we're transcribing the text, we send the request to the LLM, which then responds to the request, and it tells us which FileMaker script to run. So in this case, it's only a router, but it's just basically saying these are in this case, 3 scripts we can run, and then it chooses which one. And the response comes back looking like this. So basically, we've got the function name is the FileMaker script name, and it will pass back any parameters that it found and extracted from our input. Here's an example. So the first one was when we asked it to describe what tools are available. You can see there were no parameters for the script. And in this case, it's come back and said, for the sweatshirt product with the red color, we want to run the script view historic sales. And the script looks basically like this. It's not that complicated, actually. We set our system prompt to include the available tools. We build our query. We perform insert from URL. We do error checking. And you can see this is where I'm saying, sorry, I can't do that, Dave. And then we select and run our script using perform script specified by name with the results we get back. And FileMaker runs our script. So again, we're using FileMaker, JavaScript. The transcription side is using the Whisper LLM model. Fast API is actually only required in this case for the Whisper LLM model. We could have passed directly to Ollama, and it's primarily the LLM stuff in Ollama that I'm using. So the LLM could be hosted, could be local, could be on AWS in your infrastructure. And so in this case here, I'm getting into a little bit describing. So LLM, Wim's kind of already discussed this. And this just shows an example of running Ollama. Hold on. So I'm just basically saying Ollama. It lists the we can list the models that we've got. I then say Ollama run, and I specify the model. In this case, it's the Gemma 2 model from Google. And I'm saying, write me a poem about FileMaker in Malmö. So about probably 10 seconds maybe to run that, maybe a little longer, but that's all running locally on my MacBook M1. I still think it's like magic. Yeah, so I use Ollama. It's got an OpenAI compatible embedding API. Ollama and LM Studio, as we mentioned, they're both now compatible with OpenAI. There are other approaches to running local LLMs, but they don't have the matching and embedding model that you want to use. In my case, to be honest, mostly I've written my own APIs for that. And Ollama is free to download. Performance considerations, GPU. Yeah, so that shows that part. There is one other thing I did want to show you. And this is from here we are. Okay, so Anthropic has recently released what they refer to as the MCP standard. It's Model Context Protocol. And this shows you Llama, oh, sorry, not Llama, shows you Claude running on my Macintosh, talking to my local FileMaker server. So you can see I've got the basic FileMaker tasks file here. I've just got 3 tasks in it. So it's just like, this is really, really early stages. If I open Claude, and sorry, not intended this is going to be for a demo, but so if I ask it, what are my pending tasks? And if you think about it, Claude obviously has no idea what my tasks could be. So Claude is going to ask, is it allowed to use the tool? It's telling me I've got 1 pending task, the Engage EU presentation. I can now ask it what's in progress. And it's going to go and find me my in progress tasks. So what that's doing is that basically is, yeah, Claude talking to my local FileMaker server via an MCP server, which if we just so basically they provide a Python SDK. I've written that in Python, and it looks a bit like this. That we've got a host with an MCP client. So in this case, Claude has built in an MCP client into the desktop application on Mac. There are other ones as well. And it can talk to different servers. So I wrote a server that talks to in this case, my local data source was FileMaker. But the data source could also be something on the internet. So it gives us the ability to connect tools like the Claude desktop app to local data sources. And so that is written in Python and sorry, that's the wrong one. Hang on. Where have I got that? There we are. So essentially, in this case, you can see I've written sort of the get task. It's pretty basic. It's just talking to FileMaker in Python. I'm returning data in the correct JSON format. And yeah, so anyway, that's really early on in the development stages. So kind of a little bit haphazard in terms of presentation, but I'm really, really excited by this agent stuff. And there's a bunch of other things I've got that I'm working on that there's a lot more to come there. So probably in a couple of months, I'll be able to show considerably more on that front, but it's just really, really exciting what we can do and how the tools that FileMaker give us allow us to tie into this world and tie this world into FileMaker. So
that is extremely cool, Ian.
yeah. Any questions at this point?
Yeah, so guys, please jump in with questions and comments.
I just want to, good stuff, Ian. I just want to reinforce, and it's funny how our two presentations mesh together. Like it's almost like we rehearsed it. A lot of the stuff that Ian was saying is exactly what I was trying to say. Like it's just an API call, right? Like whether you want to use the features that FileMaker has given us without thinking about it too much, that's fine. But if you understand how they work, it's only an API call, right? And that opens or should open a lot of doors to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and also recognizing that you can do any of this with insert from URL without any of the FileMaker AI script steps, right?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Including OpenAI compatible providers, because not all of them are OpenAI compatible.
Yeah, but almost all of them, well, I mean, they all do provide some type of API.
Yeah, conversion. Yeah. You can use but you might not be able to use it from FileMaker's script steps. Yeah.
Correct, yes. But having said that, I will say I really do like the semantic search, the way they've implemented. To me, it feels just very FileMaker-like, and it just fits in beautifully with the rest of the platform, I think.
Totally agree. It's very powerful.
Yeah.
Hey, Ian, first of all, this is amazing. And thanks for ruining one of my weekends over the holidays with your MCP post connecting to FileMaker. You inspired me to go spin a bunch of cycles. I too am in very early stages, but it's just really cool. I think it's probably worth noting too that while it's a different protocol, kind of speaking to what Wim was just saying, it's really just an API call. It's kind of it's an API call at the end of the day. As a matter of fact, there's a similar function actions inside of ChatGPT when they used to have like plugins and all that. Like if you go build a GPT on their platform, actions essentially let you do the same thing. You can tie to different endpoints, and I guess somewhat loosely you're calling those as functions, or the LLM is actually like listening for certain types of things, and it's in the same manner that you would be doing with function calling. So again, not trying to be reductive, but to say, look, it's API calls. Like everything's API calls. If API calls make sense, or if you have a data source that can be connected to, then get excited about LLM integrations, right?
Yeah. Just on that point, actually, that I think that this is because agents are like the new hot topic. I think this is going to be kind of one of the battlegrounds in terms of where people are trying to establish standards. And I think that's why Anthropic open sourced it, because they're trying to get, if they can get a critical mass of people using their standard, they're in better shape. Whereas there's also, say, LangGraph, there's dozens of different options for building these kinds of things. And I think everyone right now is trying to establish themselves as a well-known standard, or the standard if they possibly can.
Yeah, because they're all going to win on not charging us all for tokens against their models. That's going to be commoditized pretty quickly.
Yeah,
they want to build IDEs and development environments and essentially, platforms, and protocols is very important to that. The desktop or mobile clients are extremely important to that as well too. And we've seen Claude obviously coming out with their desktop client last year, the ChatGPT client, and some of the support for their newer features. I think they're all sort of kind of triangulating on that. We want to bring developers into our environment, and they build on top of, our environment and model. And the model just kind of comes along with it. But the model's, sort of the leader to help hook people. But I think before too long, it's really just going to be the environments, kind of to your point.
I think so, because certainly Microsoft basically added a whole load of tools to build what they're referring to as co-pilots. Trying to keep everyone inside their sandbox.
Well, which isn't a bad idea. So that was the other thing too. I think maybe I'm hallucinating on this, but I'm very excited about agents. That's literally 2025, the year of the agent is kind of what is my mantra as well. But I don't think there's a centralized definition of agents. Like I think we're all talking about the same thing, but like Meta started to use agents. I think Microsoft coming out as agents in the last presentation that they did, whatever that conference was that they were presenting that at. I don't know if it's the same kind of agent. I don't think we're all talking about the same thing. Like we are here.
No.
But, people do you guys get the sense of that too? Because I think the working definition of an agent. Well, you had a slide for that, didn't you? Did you have sort of like what is an agent?
Yeah. Yes. I don't know if it's actually the best definition.
And I think this is worth exploring, because people are going to hear agent, like you're just going to get sick of hearing agents. It's literally going to make you vomit by December, but it's super important. So yeah, there you go. Autonomous. So, essentially, recursive, right? And adaptive. I guess you kind of throw those two things in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're breaking it down, just like for the tech. So when we're talking to a language model, we're prompting the language model. We're giving it something to work with. And then, Ian's post was on LinkedIn. I don't know if you have it somewhere else, just to speak to Heidi's question. That's where I saw it, but the MCP one.
Yeah, it was just before Christmas, so I think that's kind of just. I think I posted it there, and then that's it on.
That's the holiday or the weekend you ruined for me. I mean, I say that in jest, but but thank you for that inspiration. So I think to define what an agent actually is. So like when we're communicating with a language model through a chatbot, we're prompting it and it's responding to our prompt, which essentially underneath the surface is the same thing we would accomplish by sending an API call to this model and you know, parsing out its response.
Yeah.
But and to some degree, the chat actually incorporates context, right? You know, what you're actually doing is you're feeding it the entire conversation, including the question you just asked, which includes all the previous comments and questions you made, and then all the responses you got back. So that context is really important. That gets sent back to the chat. But what's interesting is that memory really isn't being used. I think like in the way that you know, kind of comes into play with agents. Like what do you think about that?
That depends on the sort of the architectural pattern. So the architectural pattern, this base is from a really good post by Anthropic on building effective agents.
Yeah.
And so I used the example I showed is an example of this, just
the router,
the router workflow. And this goes into detail on when you might want to use these different types of things, you know, breaking different subtasks or voting. So for example, if you think about, OpenAI has come up with this new super version of the model that's a lot slower, but is really, really expensive. But apparently what they're doing is it's basically running, it's in the background, it's just running huge number of instances with Monte Carlo simulation to, and then kind of giving like a big voting thing to give you a much better response and aggregating the results.
And so we're talking about the 01, the 01 model and the soon to be 03 model. I don't know what happened to the 02 model in there, but they call it their reasoning models, and everyone's sort of got an offering on reasoning. And I think that's an important part for those that really want to wrap your head around what an agent is and why it's important. Is if you look at those reasoning models, they're not so much like a new trained model that has a different level of intelligence. To some degree, I should note that there's some domain knowledge that has been trained in there, specific to scientific and mathematical content that maybe wasn't in previous training sets. But aside from that, what it really is a different approach to communicating with the language model. And what it is doing is it's taking whatever your question is, or your task, and it's actually turning it into a plan. As a matter of fact, for those of you that have worked with, you know, ChatGPT's 01 or Pro mode or whatever, you're going to see that it says thinking. And if you click on it, it's actually a really interesting learning exercise. If you click on the thinking part, you're going to see some of the, I probably should have just pulled it up, but you'll see that it's coming up with a plan. It's planning. And that actually is that's really what the difference of these models is. It's taking time to plan. Yeah, go ahead. There you go.
Yeah, so this type of thing.
Yep, exactly. And to some degree, you know, it's looping through all these. It's checking against its original goals. So that before you can even determine whether or not you've achieved goals, you have to have a plan in mind. Yeah. So language models are excellent at planning. As a matter of fact, if you just say to a language model, I want to figure out what the most profitable product is at my business, how should I go about determining that? It'll come up with a pretty decent plan. And if you it'll come up with a great plan, but if you ask it to prompt you for specific questions so it can personalize that plan for exactly your goals, it's going to come up with an amazing one. And so that's actually what those reasoning models essentially are doing for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say to that point, actually, if you do that kind of as a one-shot thing, you'll get a pretty good answer. But if you basically get into a conversation about what you've just got back, you'll get a much better answer. And that's what this is doing. And in fact, if you think about the new FileMaker function to give you the SQL error as text, that's what it's for. That's not for you to read. That error message is so you can hand that error message to you can execute SQL in an LLM. It'll give you, if you get an error, you can then hand the error back to the LLM and it'll fix the error that it's made, because it can understand that, whereas it can't understand just error 101 or whatever.
It's a great call. And by the way, that is why those responses in these reasoning models take so long, because those types of things are actually happening. It's cycling through, it's getting errors, it's getting the wrong conclusion, it's adjusting on the fly, going the right direction. So really, you know, just kind of at a non-tech level, if understanding what an agent does, and one of the roles it's accepting is creating a plan for you to solve your problem, that is a really important part about understanding why agents are so valuable. In addition, and you did a great job of this, Ian, when it comes up with a plan, it can also take inventory on what tools it has at its disposal, not just, resources. It can certainly browse the web to come up with certain answers. It might use function calls or just some sort of other inventory that it can search through of what your data sources are to be able to determine if those data sources can be useful to in that plan. And then just other tools, whether it just be, Python for calculating or, manipulating the data, or any other type. Computer control might be a tool, voice might be a tool, these other types of tools at its disposal as well too. So it's really, I think, if everybody, you hear about agents and, there's a little bit of confusion about it. If you think it's not just asking a question or providing a task to a language model, but asking it to plan on what the best way to come up with that answer would be, giving it tools to, be able to accomplish those tasks within that plan, and, providing appropriate data sources, of course, for it to be able to answer that, and all those together. And then with a bit of a recursive nature, some adaptability and memory, that I think is really what the agents are that everybody's talking about, that they're so excited about. And we're going to see a ton of those. Have you have you heard of Crew AI, Ian or Wim?
I have. I've
yes.
used it. I've used it both in the CLI and on the UI. Yeah, the low code and the coding part.
Yeah, they have a fun take on like they call them crews. So they have an overseer agent. It's kind of like the project manager agent. And then, oh wait, I'm trying to find chat so I can post it in here. And I mention it because, yeah, it's an environment that you can adapt and make things easier. But I also think it's kind of just, they have a kind of a fun take on it. So if you're learning agents for the first time, theirs is kind of a clever approach to it. And also if you go to right on their homepage is become a multi-agent expert in hours, which points to one of the deeplearning.ai courses that you can take and learn how to use them. By the way, deeplearning.ai, one of the best free resources for learning either super base level AI concepts all the way up to really sophisticated, highly technical concepts. People ask me where to go for resources. I always point them there, but there's a really good video on there that I think their founder, it's their founder does it. And it's an hour. Thank you. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Yeah. So the framework terms. Yeah, here we go. So an agent creates tasks, and those agents can combine together for a team, and then that team can have sort of an overseer project manager. That is really where these things go next level. So we talk about an agent being a plan that an LLM came up with, and it's utilizing tools and other resources to accomplish the goal of that plan. That's one agent. But then you start talking about agents working together as a team, or in Crew's case, a crew. That's where possibilities really go, like just kind of get amazing. And I think that's the type of thing that we're probably going to start seeing this year already. So I don't know. That was my effort to demystify it, but maybe I just made it more complicated than need be. But I'm super excited about the agents as well too. I guess really I'm getting there.
So I'm mostly at the moment using LangGraph. Most of what I'm doing.
Yeah, I'm
so
excited.
We already use some of that in not so much on the FileMaker side of the house, but on the cloud native app side of the house. Because it makes total sense, right? Because the knowledge base for these things is so well established, and like I said, the agents are specialized. We call them specialists, right? Like they focus on one task only because they're really good at just that. It doesn't muddy the waters by having to be a generalist versus a specialist, right? And that's where the agents come into play. And you just hand off the thing. It's more like a pipeline for us, right? Where you just hand things off and they each do their own thing on it.
The other benefit of that approach is that with the specialization, you don't need to use a large, expensive, large language for all the parts of it. That there may be parts of it that you're, say, just doing extracting information out of an image, in which case you may be able to just use, like, say, a YOLO model, which is going to be just basically kind of, if I call it traditional machine learning, and you're not needing to call an expensive LLM for all the pieces of it. That you can use, mix and match the pieces where appropriate.
Yeah, and that specialist approach, Wim, I'm sure for you guys, the efficiency there is also that you can have it focus on just domain relevant tools as well too. So it doesn't have to be like evaluating this vast set of resources. It can really just focus. But this is what people are talking about when they talk about agents. And I don't know, the reason I thought that was so important is because there's going to be a lot of discussion about agents in 2025 and beyond.
Yep.
The other thing is, as a thought experiment for Claris folks, this isn't loaded or anything. I just think it's a fun thing to think about. Within the Claris platform, we have other tools besides FileMaker, right? I like to think of, and I'm not necessarily like a big fan or maybe even a user of Claris Connect, but imagine if you added one layer to Claris Connect that was simply, you don't have to interact and create a flow yourself. What you can do is just articulate it in natural language. This is what the goal is that I want to accomplish. Then behind the scenes, and I'm doing this on purpose, following the thought experiment or the discussion on agents. But imagine if behind the scenes, this isn't, essentially we're building an agent. We're letting a language model, we're informing the language model of what all the different connectors are that we have access to. The objective of the connector, the triggers that it has, and the actions and descriptions of the triggers and actions that it has at its disposal. The hard part is actually doing the connections, but Claris Connect actually has those connections already built in for you. Like once you authenticate against those apps, they're available to you. So let's say you've pre-authenticated to all the different apps. You have every single app, or at least you've told this experience which of those connectors you actually have available to you. Then you articulate a problem in natural language. You say something like, I want to manage my inventory and notify my team on Slack and also the project manager via email when one of those inventory items goes below a certain level or so on, right? The Claris Connect also has tools, right? Like actual the utilities at its disposal. So you can inform the language model in the context of this experience as to what these tools do as well. And then it could create the flows for you. And then if you really wanted to get sophisticated, if you said, if there is not a connector that would help me solve this problem at this certain step of a flow, then go create one for me, because here's what the format is. You would need to go find the API online. And by the way, the browsing language models do an excellent job at finding API documentation online, and then create one accordingly. I actually did something like that for my Claris Connect course training day last year. So now we don't have this like IDE, I guess we could call it, this thing with this drag and the drop, and we got to put all the logic in ourselves. If we could just like express what the problem is we're trying to solve, and then it knows what all these tools are, and it goes and creates these flows, and it does the deploy and manages the authentication and everything, which again is the hard part and the sticky part. All of a sudden, Claris Connect can be a really interesting tool natively within the Claris platform that can perform as an agent does. So this is not a loaded question or anything. It's just an observation. I thought I would throw it out to a bunch of Claris folks and see what you thought about that. And I'm open to it being feedback being that's garbage.
I did mention something, not exactly that, but something very similar to that to Ronnie, who I got the impression he may have already had thoughts in that direction.
Yeah, this isn't a unique thought experiment by any means.
No, I think the thing is, because most things now support Open API standard, that
key part of it.
Yeah, that
exactly, and the same with APIs, right? APIs are standard, and most of them can be expressed as a standard document that is very easily understood. it's also in my presentation, you may have missed that, Chris, where I mentioned Studio, right? It's one of the reasons to be excited about Studio, because not so much for this, but when we have to think about things like vector databases and stuff like that, it's really hard to update the Draco engine for anything close to what we need for that. Studio,
Absolutely.
not so much, right? Like it's it's a given that they can do it on that side.
No question. Studio is, yeah. And by the way, it's the same presentation you did as the Community Live presentation, or maybe a condensed version of it, Wim, because that Community Live is outstanding.
Thanks.
You're so patient in that. That's a tough thing to do. I've watched it several times myself and sent a lot of people to it, so I wasn't sure if that was the one that you had done here. But speaking to the Studio part, absolutely. Let's just, like, if we talk about the concept of developer assist features, which we have 0 of in the Claris platform, which means help me build, right? You know, like a co-pilot, let's call it for Claris. Doing that inside FileMaker is going to be a real trick. It's going to be tricky. If you focus instead, if your goal is to explain, like bring in AI as an explainer within the FileMaker development experience, I think you can really make a lot of amazing things happen. Like, for example, just imagine if you could just take one of your files and have every field commented, even layouts commented, every script commented and described for you. And even a series of scripts as they're put together. Why are these put together? What are the dependencies? If you could just document all of that, or just sort of level up, especially if you're inheriting one of these files, but I'm just talking about if you created it yourself, that is a tremendous amount of developer assist. That you can actually do in FileMaker with a pretty light lift. It's mostly just on the model training side. But to generate code, and this is what you're talking about, I believe, Wim, is that what code are we, you're not generating, you know, Draco? What are we actually creating? But in Studio, we're essentially creating a React component. And not essentially, it's exactly what's being created, is a certain flavor with the different rules in there. We're creating a React component. That is very easy to do. As a matter of fact, I can tell you that I did an experiment, mostly tongue-in-cheek here, when artifacts first came out and Claude. So Ian showed the Claude desktop IDE. One of the really cool features, and I think this is going to become ubiquitous in AI development platforms soon, is the double column. There's actually now a 3-column approach where you're actually having a chat in one column, and then the thing you're creating is showing up in a preview mode on the other column to the left. Just as an experiment, I had somebody here at iSolutions pull up some Studio thing they were working on. I took a screenshot of what they had built in Studio, and they were working on it for a few days, and they were doing a good job. And I brought it into Claude and I said, I want to build a React component. That was all the technical context I gave it based on this image. And I pasted that image into Claude, and it took us 109 seconds to actually generate a actual React component in the preview environment with all the code. And you can export it if you want. It really was about 20 something seconds, but I had to go back a couple, I wanted to change the CSS a little bit, and one of the drop downs wasn't actually active, and I thought maybe I could put some predefined options in there. To speak to Wim's point, you can absolutely create Studio applications with native code. And the best thing about JavaScript, or React in particular, is that it's so mature within the coding assist models. You know, all the hallucinations we get when we try to ask FileMaker to create a script for us are because there's just as many wrong answers in the training set as there are right answers, and it doesn't really know how to discern between them. But one of the amazing things about logic-based coding, like Python is a great example, is that it can actually render and actually can run those things. It doesn't have the ability to run a FileMaker script or even a calculation to see if it was correct or not. That's one of the nice things about these Copilot and Code Assist features that generate things like JavaScript or Python. So if in fact we have something in the Claris platform that is in fact JavaScript, and we could use Code Assist tools to generate those things based on natural language, well, that part's easy. We could do that in seconds. The thing that gets really hard is authentication, the entire security aspect, hosting, multi-user support. But that's actually, of all the things that Studio doesn't do, it does all those things pretty darn well. They've got those things figured out. So it'd be really interesting to me to actually take all the wires that are sticking out on authentication management, security, connecting to data sources on the back end, now even moving in this maybe dynamic Claris Connect experience that we were just playing around with a moment ago, into that creating the authoring environment to create these components and then hand it off to the existing Claris environments. I think that would be really interesting. And I think that's probably where, I don't know, if it was up to me, that's where I would put the effort first. And it's probably disappointing for us FileMaker folks to hear, because we wanted to create FileMaker files for us, and we wanted to do FMXML and I don't think that's out of the woods. I believe strongly that there's is anybody here familiar with CRISPR? This is just like a medical, term technology. It's basically essentially these things you can deploy into DNA, and it like cuts and snips and does things. And I think if there's a CRISPR for FMXML that's managed and driven by an LLM, then we can actually build and modify files, like go into a FileMaker file and say, change this layout to this, or add a couple layouts that'll support this, and then do these sequence of things, and then go into the code and CRISPR it and snip it and put it all together. But, with the rendered file, it's really going to be kind of explainer, and then, maybe just using ChatGPT as a tool. But I don't know. I'm really hopeful about some of these things actually being a lot more possible than anyone thinks. I don't know. Anybody's thoughts on any of that craziness?
My pet peeve, if we focus just on the FileMaker Pro side of things, as it stands, I agree with you. Anything like heavy duty code generation or modification like that, it's going to not impossible. It's a big lift to get there. What I'm hoping for is the perennial problem, or a solution to the perennial problem of the typical FileMaker developer having no education about any of the things that they're building, right? But if the product can take their hand, like somebody's creating address 1, address 2, address 3, where it says like, maybe they should be a related table. Let me suggest how to do that, right? Or they create a spider graph and they just add one more TO where it says, hold on a second, you're approaching the point where this will become a performance issue, right? So things like that, where it isn't exactly code generation, but I guess tapping into the
truly an
knowledge base.
assist. It's an assistant in that case. That's such a great take. I hadn't considered that, and that is such a helpful take. And it's funny because Claris would agree. We don't even have to ask them. They would agree, and here's why we know. If you look at, I always told people who were preparing for the certification exam, the old certification exam, it's basically a bunch of things that Claris makes sure they want you to know, because we've all been doing it the wrong way before. Like, that's literally the questions that they pick and the way that they frame these things. Sure. It's kind of like the same thing as if you see, you see some big sign somewhere that says, please do not break bottles and put them into the sand upright. You're like, well, obviously somebody did that and somebody stepped on it and there's a lawsuit. Well, it's the same kind of reason FileMaker was putting all those, like, what should you do if you were blah, 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 blah thing, and you're supposed to pick those. They were picking all those things that were, causing the most problems within the customer experience and, leading to the most customer dissatisfaction or support issues or whatever it was, right?
Yeah. So
when we just forget trying to educate all, just build those in. And especially if they were in control of sort of the brain that's driving that they could literally then take the data, the incoming data that says, this week in customer support, this was the leading confusion from anybody who's building on top of our platform. Literally take correct that action, put it into this brain, and then feed it in within the next second that somebody in the world is actually trying to do that same thing.
Yep,
the efficiency levels would be insane.
It solves one of the big issues for Claris, right? Like you said, ideally you want to educate people, but you don't want to make the entry into the product so hard that people feel like they have to go get an education before they can. And besides, people don't know what they don't know. So that's kind of like a chicken and the egg kind of problem anyway. But if you can guide them before they shoot themselves in the foot, because we all know in the long term, somebody builds something and it's great. Then it becomes a little less great. Then it becomes really bad. And then they blame the platform because the platform sucks.
Or they silently quit, right? And then, Claris never knows whatever happened to that person or, why they're no longer engaged. And I think silently quitting and the frustrations that Wim just described are the number one reason for lack of growth in the Claris community.
I would agree. I would agree. And that's where I see AI or implementing that side of that bit of AI within the product. I think, I'm not saying that it's an easy task, but it feels like a feasible task.
It certainly has been for some time. All the tools have been at our fingertips to be able to do this. So, no time better than 3 years ago, but certainly at the very least now would be a great time to do it too. So, by the way, a time check, I apologize. I know
It's great. It's great, Chris. We're really enjoying this discussion and all your ideas. I mean, it's a phenomenal flow of interesting views.
I just wanted to add one thing. Based on what Wim and Chris were talking about, is the fact that I'm a seasoned developer of very established systems. So when we're looking at our systems and the stack of what we've got lots of files. I think that education thing is really cool. Certainly for if I need a new developer to come in and work on a platform, they could then have that guide them about how we've built the platform, how we're using it, and so forth. The other side of it is we are seasoned developers. We know the right ways of doing stuff, but I've got a legacy system that was built from FileMaker 3 and moved through. It would be nice to ask an AI to go, where would you like me to focus for efficiencies in this massive solution that we've got with the tools that the latest version of FileMaker delivers? And it may go, oh, did you know there's these functions now that are available to you that there is a better way of developing what you do within your script platform? And to me, that is absolutely key, because we've got hundreds of thousands of scripts, millions of script steps in our solutions. And it would be good to ask that and go away and find a better way to do. And it may come back and go, if you rewrote your scripts in this format, in these areas, you'll get a 20% bump in performance. And it's like, that's brilliant. That would be ideal. I think that would be a game changer. Absolute game changer.
Gary, that's such a brilliant, but imagine if every time they came out with a new version of FileMaker and they have their, what's new in this version, their 20 different things. Imagine if that's just built into this assist that we're talking about, that you can turn on and go, well, I don't even know what any of these new features are, but hey, have at my, make some suggestions based on what some of the new stuff is. And it could go, oh, in these scripts over here, you're doing this, that, and the other thing. You could just replace this with a, a perform script by list or something instead of name, right? Or whatever the thing is, right? And then you could choose to just do it in that case.
That'd be great.
So much upside.
There's a discussion that's going on somewhere else around the issues of how much developers should bear the burden of failing to put in enough error trapping into the way that they're building something. So partly, when we build something, we test if it just does it. Of course, it always works, but that's not the real world. But it was about the fact that there's a current problem in the space, which if we're not capturing for it because we don't need it, but if there is no error trapping going on, then this thing might then come back and bite you because you weren't doing the thing you should do. So to Gary's point, something about saying, if I look at these scripts, being able to analyze what they're doing and why it's important that this may not contain enough error trapping, for example, is another thing there to be able to, and I, part of my point in that discussion was every time we have to roll our own sets of script steps and things that we copy and paste, we develop our own stuff and it works for us. But for example, when Claris introduced the JSON functions, we stopped immediately using the 6 fried rice ones because those were roll your own, and suddenly everybody can now use the same thing. We might use them in slightly different ways, but now we're using what we call native FileMaker objects and script steps to do jobs which can therefore be standardized. So some stuff like error trapping is something that everybody has written their own versions of. How do we do this to a log? How do we do it to a dialogue? If there was more in the platform that we could hook onto, but then we had that intelligence that said, okay, here's some scripts. What's wrong with the scripts? Well, there may be nothing wrong with the scripts, except that what you haven't done is put in enough error trapping.
But guess where else you have intelligence, John, is in your error logs, where the errors are actually occurring, and you can tell when they're occurring and why they're occurring, and having that intelligence for those localized user base fed back into it. And how often have you gone to like a DevCon presentation or seen a trainer do something and they go, well, here's how the script is, but of course, if I had more time, I would put in error trapping and this, that, and the other thing. Like, why can't that just be a lever we pull where we go, this is the basic gist of what my script is. You go in and, put in the things that I should do to make this thing bulletproof, right? So,
well, one of the things I wanted to say on that is that, like, when FileMaker launched the transaction, doing something transactionally, that's revolutionary for what we want, but our solutions are so big. It's well, how the hell do I put that in? It's going to take some time to put that in and trap for and make something act within milliseconds and be on a transactional, and I can roll back and I have no problems and so forth. If there was a switch to say, right, take this bit of the script, which could be how we process deliveries or shipments, and turn just that bit into a transactional model, that would be great, absolutely great. Because at the moment, I know that Penny and Ben, who are doing this work, are sitting there pulling their hair out, going, "How? What? Why? Where to start?"
And I guess half the problem is that they don't know what the script does without doing a lot of analysis on it. Wouldn't it be great if you could throw comments into the script that said, "This is what the script's for. This is what it's doing."
Exactly. Yeah. So you got to start somewhere, and the problem is you're starting at the bottom, and it'd be nice to have a tool that gets you to start maybe 20% in, and that'll be just a game changer. So, really cool. Really cool discussion.
All these are reasonable. So yeah, this is fun. Thanks for the forum for this, but I can talk about this stuff all day. I'm sure all you guys could too.
That's great.
You can come back and talk whenever you want, Chris. It's fine.
Love to. Yeah, I'll just give the folks here a quick heads up. I don't want to steal plugs when I didn't even present anything. I'll throw it back to Ian and Wim for that very thing. But there's courses on the semantic search capabilities within FileMaker if you guys are new to that. I have a LinkedIn Learning course coming out, but save your $25 and instead wait for the Claris Academy version of that, which I'm not sure if it's going to have micro certification attached. I think that's the goal. So I believe you might be able to become micro certified on semantic search soon enough. That's all in the can, just waiting to kind of get, deployed on the Academy. And then, before long, it's already January. Oh my God. I was trying to be funny, but actually it is already January and it is going to be Engage here soon. For those of you that are going to make it to Austin, it's probably not a lot of people. It's certainly from the international community, but for those people that are going, we're doing a full training day where I'm going to do the hands-on version of those same courses to walk everybody from zero to all the way through implementing semantic search, along with some other LLM functions that may or may not be available at the time. Also have guest speaker Ronnie coming in and showing a bunch of stuff, whatever the crazy stuff is that his mind comes up with between now and the end of March. He'll be showing in that same presentation. So if you know anybody, or if you guys are going to be in Austin, come check out that training day. I think I'm really excited about that one.
That's great. I think you said you might be, I know you were asking about February meet, but we don't have that February meet. Is a March?
Yeah, I'm going to give a little preview of that and get some feedback from folks and, kind of connect the dots and hopefully get people going.
March meet work for you for that?
Yeah. Is that a beginning of March then?
Yeah. First Monday in March.
Yeah. If you don't have somebody already, I wouldn't mind showing you guys what's cooking, and I could probably tee up a little bit more of the content that's going to be part of training day as well too. Just to kind of
and I promised you up there as well to show us some more about Mark Claude.
Nice.
So that'll be great. Thank you everyone who's come for presenting and talking and joining in the discussion. And I think this has been one of the most valuable meetings we've had. Well, certainly most interesting.
Bloody good one. Yeah, really good.
But it's you guys who've made it all.
You're going to have to queue up the link to this because we're going to spread it far and wide and say you have to watch this. Everybody has been excellent. This is a wonderful discussion. This is great. But
thanks, Beverly.
Tell us where it is, because we want to share with everybody now.
You've just planted the seed, Beverly, of Jewel chasing me to say, can you edit the video and get it up there quickly this time? Because it's all on me. So I apologize, everyone. That's going to be on me, and I'll be looking at it and getting out there quick. So don't worry, I'll be on it this week. So.
Okay, that's great. Shall we switch the recording off and move to the bar? And as I said, fantastic for everyone's contributions, all of you. Great.
Wonderful. Excellent. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers, everyone.